I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast. I have my special guest, Patrick Barbour with the Millionaire Recruiter Club, here to talk about how he went from the edge of financial ruin and almost into bankruptcy to becoming a millionaire through recruiting, the lessons he learned along the way, and what it takes to be a top biller and run a seven-figure agency. So, Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks, Ben.
Now, I start off by asking every single guest, how did you end up in this world of recruiting?
That's a great question. So candidly, my background is actually in project management engineering in the petrochemical space. So I was a PM and operational leader within a couple of different OEMs in that industry. And one of the things that I was tasked with was managing large capital projects, things that we call turnarounds in the industry, where basically they're overhauls for refineries, chemical plants, that sort of thing. And one of the resources that we would leverage in order to execute those projects were what we call contract labor, but truthfully, what it is it's industrial staffing. And so, running those projects, being a decision maker, and calling the shots and assessing which organizations we worked with. It definitely, obviously, from a P&L standpoint, being responsible for cost control and ultimately profitability on those projects, I would assess the numbers with our contract labor folks, providers, and also kind of background. I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial streak in me. And so in 2015, I started kind of just putting some pen to paper and getting my calculator out and trying to dial in exactly how much money these folks were making off of our projects, and quickly realized that it was substantial. They were making really good money. It was a meaningful number, and my next immediate thought was, I could totally do this, and probably better than they could. And so that started this 2-year process in my mind. I don't know, for lack of a better word, mental masturbation of like what it would be like to create my own staffing business and do this and quit my 9 to 5 and all that. And so, like I said, that was about a 2-year process where I literally just kind of obsessed over doing it. And then in 2017, I finally I put all my chips on the table and I quit my job, and people that were close to me thought I was insane for doing it because I had a very nice position, very, very cushy job, very nice lifestyle. And so, yeah, I was basically giving all that up and going out on my own to try this new venture. And so I did in 2017. It was actually late 2016 when I quit my job. LLC formed in early 2017, and we were off to the races. And from a client acquisition standpoint, saw some really early success, leveraging my own professional network up until that point, people that I had worked with in the past that knew and respected me and trusted, my potential ability to deliver on skilled craft labor. And landed some really nice contracts, but made a lot of really big mistakes that first year that were ultimately catastrophic, potentially catastrophic. So.
And we'll jump at that in a few minutes, but want to
Yeah,
take a few steps back into the conversation. You said you spent about 2 years just thinking about this. Is that correct?
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And I don't want to say this kind of like my story, but I had a full-time contract recruiting job. I was sitting there digging in. I got to do this. I got to have my own firm. And what finally pushed you over the edge to pull the trigger?
Yeah, it was a couple things. The first thing was that I'd reached a nice point in my career where I was what I would call middle management. Responsible for P&L, had a nice salary, had a nice bonus, but it was pretty obvious to me at that point that as far as my own professional trajectory, that I had really plateaued, and that was as good as it was going to get for me, at least for the next decade or so, in order to kind of make the step from a manager to a director or VP level. That there was still quite a steep hill to climb, a lot of competition, and I just that didn't sit well with me. I couldn't accept the idea of like, okay, this is it for the next 10 years at least. From an earnings standpoint, from a day-to-day standpoint, just that didn't jive. And then ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back, and something that had always kind of bothered me also throughout my career was working for people who I felt were not that bright or intelligent, just kind of riding the coattails of the people under them. And so there was a project that we were working on there in mid 2016 that went sideways. There was a situation, and I won't get into details and bore everybody with the minutia of what happened. But basically, there was a situation that had presented itself on the project, and it was kind of a fork in the road on which way we should take as an organization to navigate and maneuver this landmine that had reared its ugly head. And so I had a very strong opinion on which way we should go. My boss at the time disagreed. And so there were a lot of really open, direct, hard conversations that were had both offline and then in a public setting within our organization. And so ultimately he went out because, he had the seniority and he was wrong. And he stepped square on that landmine. It blew up. In that industry, they have something that's called liquidated damages, LDs as they refer to it. So basically what that means is in that world, if for whatever reason your project goes beyond an agreed upon completion date, every day thereafter, because the refinery will be closed down, there's lost revenue. And so the project, the folks responsible for executing that project have to pay a penalty to our client to make that revenue gap whole. And we're talking about 10, 20, $30 million a day. It's a meaningful number. And so that did not go well. And so the liquidated damages on that project were substantial. And at the end of it, there was a post-mortem process with the leadership of the organization that I worked with, where basically it was kind of an accountability moment. And he completely threw me under the bus as kind of boots on the ground, even though I completely disagreed with the decision. And then when that happened, I just said, you know what, to hell with this. I'm going out on my own. And so yeah, that was kind of what pushed me over the edge.
I love it because every single person I talk to that had finally made the jump, there's like a story behind that actual push. I mean, mine was something like I was taking my first vacation in years in France, and they're like, "We got to let you go, unfortunately. Can you ship us back your laptop?" And I'm like, "I'll ship it. But like, I can find a UPS store, but you guys are paying for it. Well, where you at? France? We're not paying for that. Well, I'm not giving you your laptop back until I get back."
Yeah, cool. Then I guess you're waiting for your laptop then. Yeah.
But that was the moment after a glass of wine. Like I was chatting with my soon to be wife. I was like, "All right, let's just do this."
Yeah, that's nothing like doing two of the most stressful things you'll ever do in your life, getting married and starting a business at the same time. That's awesome.
So let's jump into talking about everything. You had a lot of early success, which was phenomenal. I know not everybody sees that early success. So you saw the early success, and then you started running into trouble. Like, what was the trouble and what happened?
Yeah, the success that I saw was my ability to close, get new contracts and get agreements and get business rolling in the space that I was focused in. But early on, I made some pretty big mistakes. And so what ultimately happened my first year was I took on a contract with a company for a project that they were running, and deployed a bunch of people, almost 50 people on this project. Things were going well the first month or two. And in the staffing business, obviously, you're laying out a lot of cash up front for payroll and insurances and testing and all this good stuff. But what happened was I did not do any due diligence on the financial solvency of that client. And about 3 months in, they declared bankruptcy. And at that point, I was not using any factoring whatsoever because I just wasn't educated. I knew about factoring, but I just had my own nest egg that I wanted to leverage because I wanted the extra margin and all this. And so yeah, they ended up filing for bankruptcy and nearly bankrupted me in the process because I had a lion's share of my operating capital outlaid for that. The payroll on that project of what had already taken place, and there were no invoices that were getting paid back on that to replenish my capital. So it was a really yuck situation. Luckily, I was able to kind of maneuver through that over the course of the next 6-7 months and get my money back. But it was a stressful moment for sure.
So that goes into the question: people that are just starting out their own recruiting agency, would you recommend jumping straight into staffing
Definitely
yourself?
not. Absolutely not. So yeah, if I had to do it all over again, direct hire is definitely path of least resistance. I did staffing exclusively for 3 years before starting a direct hire vertical. Staffing can definitely be lucrative. I've made a ton of money. I mean, we've been very successful in that space, and at our highest point, had over 165 people deployed across the country on payroll. But it
Phenomenal.
it is a very challenging industry. It does come with way more risk than what you will typically find in a direct hire setup, at least getting started. And yeah, direct hire all the way for sure.
I know the staffing side of the house is one side that I typically try to stay away from.
Yeah.
Almost for that reason exactly, because I unfortunately have seen it in the GovCon space where the government can sometimes take 6 to 7 months to pay a bill.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And candidly, since we had so much early success with our direct hire vertical, the direct hire division within our business is actually now the lion's share and the core, the centerpiece of our organization. We still do staffing, but it's a much smaller piece of our business now. And we've intentionally restructured and refocused, if you will, to really have that be our core competency.
So I wanted to jump into another question about the story.
Yep.
So you're, 50 people, payroll, the company goes bankrupt. You're looking at yourself and just like, pretty much, what the fuck am I going to do?
Yeah.
You said it took you 6 to 7 months to recover. What was two things? Your mindset during that recovery phase, and what kind of action did you take?
Yeah, great question. So the mindset was ultimately for me, it was just a core belief and ultimately the overall strategy that I was trying to execute to. I just had a ton of belief in what I was doing. I knew that the business model would work. Like I said, 2 years prior, I had gone through in my mind every which way to try to disprove the thesis that I had that I could become very wealthy doing this as a business owner and as an occupation. So I had really strong belief. I think one of the things that really kind of set me up to step through that successfully, also early on, I made a decision with myself through talking to some people that I considered mentors at the time who had kind of gone out and done other business ventures, not recruiting related. And they told me, they said, listen, you need to, if you're really going to do this, you need to go ahead and accept the fact right now that you are going to have moments at the beginning, at the middle, later in your career where things are not going to go your way, where things are going to be tough. There are going to be constraints, headwinds, disappointments, just all sorts of negative things that are going to happen. You have to know that now. Go ahead and get your mind wrapped around that fact right now because it will happen. Know it now. And the reason it's important that you know it now is so that when it happens, it doesn't surprise you and completely knock the wind out of your sails and cause you to give up, because that's the one thing that you cannot do is give up. Once you quit, it's over. You're taking the L. That's a wrap, and you're going back to work and all of that. So having that mindset going into it, and then when that happened, I did not expect something of that magnitude to happen that early on. But when it did, I just kind of put my chin strap on and said, okay, here it is. This is what John and Cody were telling me about. Let's go and let's just step through it. The second piece of your question, as far as the action, was I just got into. I hired an attorney. I started networking, talking to people that I knew through my own professional network of things that I could do, recourses that I could take to try to get our money out. Learned about the liquidation process for them and how to get in line for that. And just really did a ton of effort on information gathering, and then taking that, formulating an actual strategy, a plan that we could execute and execute immediately. And that was really it.
Phenomenal. And just for some of the listeners out there, I know a lot of people like to hear like numbers and KPIs and that kind of stuff. Like,
Sure.
did you make yourself like a KPI target to get your business back on schedule, or like were you like what kind of like call numbers, sales numbers, meeting numbers, submission numbers got you back up?
So luckily, we had other agreements that we were executing to at the time. There were 3 other contracts that we had in play, which really helped kind of sustain us through this period, because those were cash flow generating, and so that was good. As far as getting through, so yeah, we had definitely have operational KPIs and metrics and benchmarks that we were tracking to, but as far as that situation specifically, they were more milestone oriented, if you will. There were certain things in the bankruptcy process that they were going through that needed to happen, and then we would do this, this, and then this would happen, and then we would need to do these things, and so on and so forth. So there was a bit of a wait and see, with a flavor of how long it would take and timeline and all that, but a lot of uncertainty for sure.
Awesome. So, want to kind of move forward. You've grown your direct placement business. You now have the Millionaire Recruiter Club. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I started Millionaire Recruiter Club to basically help. We have two programs, a mastermind group and an elite group. The mastermind group I started for folks that are in startup mode, or early pre-revenue, however you want to phrase that. But for folks that want to get into this business, that want to flatten the learning curve, and learn from somebody who is actually doing it, who is actually in this industry, who is living and breathing it, who understands the constraints, what works, what doesn't, and is not going to sell you a pipe dream for sure, but can definitely get you to the promised land. The elite group is for folks who are more established, who have an agency. We look for folks that have at least a revenue level of 300,000 or higher, and looking to scale their agency through building out a team to get to seven figures, while also adding new verticals to their business as well to ultimately deliver sustainability and consistent revenue and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Awesome. So that's amazing, and I'll definitely have the link for that in the show notes for the listeners. Now, flipping back over to actionable advice. What is some of the best ways to become a top biller and create a seven-figure recruiting business?
That's a good question. And so, obviously billing seven figures in anything is, it's a pinnacle of a lot of people's careers in business. And so there's multiple components to that answer, but I'm happy to give several, because there's not just one thing like, oh, just do this and you're going to become a millionaire. I think for me and in my experience, it really starts around focusing on quality clients and quality roles. I talk about this all the time. One of the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest catastrophic landmine that you can step in the recruiting business that can literally knock you out of the game is time wasters. There's a big gaping hole in the recruiting space full of opportunities to waste a lot of time and resources. And so your ability as a business owner to be able to identify time wasters, to when things become apparent, be able to build that muscle to identify when that's happening and pivot is absolutely critical, and know what a quality client and what a quality role looks like. It's absolutely critical. The other thing too is you can make money in certain spaces in niches within recruiting. But in my opinion, in order to really hit seven figures and hit the big numbers, you need to make sure that you're getting as much juice for the squeeze. And so that kind of really kind of centers around the quality, the quality roles that you want to be working on as well. And so really having that as the focal point of your business and what you're focused on is incredibly important. We have something that we use internally in my business and in our group. It's a scorecard that we created that's kind of a matrix style, if you will. And so what we do is there's a number of variables that we use to grade and assess not only new clients, but current clients and opportunities, assess those opportunities on a number of different things that we find important. That will ultimately indicate to us the likelihood or probability that this is going to be centered around quality and ultimately yield us revenue, which is why we're doing this. And so it's kind of a data-driven strategic approach where it kind of takes the subjectivity out of it and makes it very just kind of cut and dry on, yes, we're going to work on this. No, we're not. And then if we are going to work on this, if it's contingent, in the landscape of our priorities, where does that land? Is it a high priority? Are there still some risks here? And maybe we drop it down here. What does that look like? That way we're doing it from a data driven standpoint. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would say is being preventative and proactive. That really needs to be a major component of your culture and in everything, ingrained in everything that you do. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care if you're in recruiting. I don't care if you're manufacturing sodas. I don't care if you're a construction company. The difference, one of the biggest differences, in my opinion, what I've seen of best in class organizations within the industries that they're in and everybody else is their ability, those organizations' abilities to be preventative and proactive, to be able to see the whole field completely, to know where the different landmines are in their business, know how to take countermeasures and create actionable plans to avoid those so that ultimately their clients, their customers do not feel the impact of those things so that they ultimately have the highest client experience working with them, which derives long-term partnerships and all the other good stuff in business. So that is something that absolutely needs to be a centerpiece in what you're doing if you're looking to do seven figures. I talked a little bit about this, having a systematic approach in everything that you do, making sure that what you're doing is repeatable. One of the things that I preach also is, obviously being a small business owner, we all want the profits. That's what we're in this thing for. But truly, in my opinion, what you should covet is long-term sustainable profits, not these massive volatility swings where it's feast or famine. And so the way that you can deliver that sustainability, that consistent billing month in and month out, is through having a systematic, repeatable approach in every aspect of what you do. And so that's something that's super, super important. Using data to drive the decisions that you make, obviously very important as well. And then finally, I think staying ahead of the learning curve. This business is constantly changing. It just is. I mean, what is true in today's market there are things that are true today that were not true 3 months ago, a quarter ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. And so if you're not constantly consuming information, testing, networking, figuring out what works, what doesn't, paying attention to leading indicators, not only in your own business, but in the industry itself, within the economy, it's gonna inject some volatility into your business and likely prevent you from hitting those seven figures as well.
Phenomenal advice. Now, on the same topic, what has worked this year, it might not have worked last year. Things that worked last year aren't working this year.
Right.
What's some of the best ways to get new clients in 2023?
Great question. Great question. And you're absolutely right. I think, and this is really good for not only current agency owners, but for folks wanting to get into the recruiting space. You need to know which industries to focus on. Obviously being specialized in a niche is important, and you can definitely make a lot of money. But for the new folks, picking that niche or getting into something without having a name or a brand or a track record or social proof or anything to fall back on, it can be challenging and ultimately keep you from getting out of the gate. For instance, technology. And if this was 2020, 2021, technology was the bell cow, right? I made a ton of money in tech. But if you were coming if I was having a call with you right now, today in 2023, March 31st, and you say, yeah, I'm going to start a tech recruiting firm, I would tell you, prepare to be in a world of pain. I mean, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be very challenging. You're likely not going to make it. And so I think understanding just the entire labor landscape as a whole, the economy as a whole, and having knowing where to look in terms of data to make those decisions and drive you to where the hot pockets of the economy are as it relates to recruiting is super important. Just a nugget for anybody listening, two places I would recommend you start paying attention to, regardless whether you're starting out or whether you've been in the game for 20 years. BLS, the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.gov, they put out a monthly jobs report. It's a very dry report, but there's a lot of juice in there that gets pretty granular, industry specific. There's some leading indicators that will tell you industries that are doing well, industries that are not doing well, segments of the country that are doing well in terms of labor and hiring, company sizes, all sorts of good stuff. And then in parallel to that report, ADP does their own version. I think the URL is adpemploymentreport.com. So for those that don't know who ADP is, they happen to be the largest payroll processor on the planet. And so they have their own very massive subset of data as it relates to the workforce in the United States. And so they release a report in parallel. It's much easier to digest. There's more visuals and that sort of thing, but same type of information. What industries are doing well, organization size, et cetera. So knowing where to hunt is going to be super, super important. The other thing that I would say as far as drumming up new business, aside from all that, is you really need to, in terms of your value proposition and what you're bringing to the table for new clients, you need to really understand what it is that makes you different. I think that, I'm probably not breaking any news to anybody, but I think generally speaking, regardless what industry you're talking about, there is a level of recruiter fatigue amongst a lot of decision makers in various industries. There's just been a lot of new really bad recruiters that have come onto the scene and promised the world and underdelivered and really given us a bad name. That's actually happened even beyond that. But I think generally speaking, there's a lot of fatigue. And so there's some skepticism with a lot of decision makers, even though they still have the demand, they still have the need for our services. They are far more guarded than what they used to be. And so doing things like asking for a hard call to action, like, hey, let's jump on a call, isn't working as well anymore. You need to slow step it a little bit with them, build some trust, share some value, demonstrate some value for them so that they know that they're not wasting their time. And so explaining to them how you do what you do that is different than the efforts that they've already done either internally or what they've experienced through working with other recruiters is absolutely critical. And one thing you absolutely need to make clear, if you don't have a strategy around how to get candidates without having the opportunity that you're recruiting for have the higher pay, then you are going to be in trouble. You need to have a strategy around how to do that and market opportunities in the candidate market, not relying on a paycheck. So that would be my recommendation.
Oh, phenomenal. So we're going to jump into some, I don't want to call them like quick fire questions, but these are questions that I love to ask every single guest because there's so much that every guest just adds value with these questions. So ready?
Let's do it.
All right. What advice would you give to a brand new recruiter that's just starting off in 2023?
Yeah. That is a great question. So the first thing that comes to mind is be very, very careful who you're listening to and who you're taking advice from. There are a lot of gurus in the recruiting space, a lot. And so, yes, most of them have at some point had recruiting experience where they've run their own agencies, but many of them are currently not in the industry, which is not advertised willfully by them. And so that's a problem. That's a real problem. Not only for it's a problem for our industry, but it's a problem for you, the new recruiter, as well. Because as we talked about earlier, this thing is constantly changing. And so if you haven't been recruiting for 3 years and you're trying to teach somebody how to recruit, the information that you're putting out there is likely obsolete. And so that's very, very important. So if you're talking to people, if you're watching YouTube videos or whatever the case may be, one thing that you might want to ask whoever you're listening to is, are you currently recruiting? How many placements did we made this year? How big is your team? What niche are you currently recruiting in? And if they're not, then that needs to be a moment for you to pause and really kind of recalibrate where you're getting your information. Very, very important.
And I remember when the reason why I started this podcast, if you want a good laugh, I started at a large staffing company. About 2-3 months in, they sat me down and they're like, you just fucking suck. Like, we're going to fire you, but the only reason why we haven't fired you yet is because you're hitting your KPI numbers. You just suck at recruiting. So I, went home, had a glass of wine. The next day I came into work and I started making calls. Like, every week we got the top 10 people of every industry. So I started making calls to like the number one recruiter. I was like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what can I learn from you? What the things that I can emulate? And that's actually one of the reasons why this podcast started was just for people that are top billers to share that information out there. Because, unlike now where there's noise and information everywhere. So definitely thank you for listening, listeners, and thank you for coming on the podcast, Patrick.
Absolutely.
But it was like back in 2006, there wasn't anywhere to go. There
Yeah.
wasn't information. It was like maybe I didn't know who Steve Finkel was and his books and stuff like that. Like nobody passed me that. It was just like
Right.
a quick, you know, make some hit your 75 calls and figure it out kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So definitely great advice on figuring out who you're going to listen to.
Yep.
Um, Next question. There's tons of recruiters that have been in this space for decade, 2 decades. I'm almost at the edge of 2 decades myself.
Nice.
What advice would you give those recruiters to be successful and stay successful in 2023?
Yeah, that's a great question also. And so a couple things. I think one is really assessing the consistency and stability of your revenue. If you're seeing large volatility swings in your revenue stream, meaning one month you're crushing it, the next month it's nothing, so on and so forth, that's something that you really need to ask yourself why. What am I doing operationally that is injecting this volatility into my business? Because it does not have to be that way. And ultimately, that state is what's probably holding you back from whatever's hit the next level is, whatever the next step is for you. The other thing that I would say is you really need to take a look at how you're operating, how you're fulfilling for clients, and making sure that you are zigging while everybody is zagging. I think that is super, super important, especially right now with the influx and how not that recruiting is crowded. There are a lot of recruiters, but comparatively to the size of the industry, we're actually probably right sized. Nevertheless, everybody is doing the same thing. And so in order to gain an edge in your market in this industry, you need to figure out what is it that's going to be different about you. So for instance, if your strategy is to, when you get a new job order, you're going straight to LinkedIn, and let's say you're working a role that, three other recruiters have worked on and your client has worked on, guess what? They've probably also been to LinkedIn. You know what I mean? So to start there maybe might not be the best start. What else are you going to do, right? How are you going to find those people? How are you going to be different? That's ultimately likely one of the components to bridging that volatility and smoothing things out from a revenue standpoint. Yeah, and I think just having a data-driven approach, letting the data drive how the decisions that you're making, how you're doing what you're doing, that sort of thing. Let the numbers lead you that way. One of the things that I battle with myself and along with other experienced recruiters is with experience comes bad habits and misconceptions and just gut feelings and this sort of thing. Sometimes there's a place and time for that type of assessment, but ultimately what's not going to steer you wrong is following the numbers and what's working and what's not. So that's something that you definitely need to pay attention to. And then staying ahead of the curve. Like we said 3 times already, this thing is constantly changing. And so if you're not constantly consuming information and educating yourself and this sort of thing, you're going to get left behind.
Awesome, great advice. Is there a book that has had a huge impact on your career and your business?
Oh man. The one I recently read, $100 Million Offer by Alex Hormozy, was incredible. But I think one of my favorite books to recommend, especially to new folks, is what is it? The Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belfort. Really great, easy read, but gives you a really good mindset and perspective of how to be a salesperson, how to sell what it is that you're selling, to earn trust and appreciation, and also come off and project as an expert and passionate about what you're doing and this sort of thing. It's a really great intro book for sure.
I love that. I haven't read the book. I'm going to go pick it up, but I know that's one of
Yeah,
the big misconceptions with recruiting. Like, no matter what you're doing with recruiting, whether you're in the talent acquisition side of the house, you're internal, you're an agency, you're an owner, a solo recruiter, like sales is just so important. It's such a factor that we just don't talk about enough.
yeah, totally. Totally, absolutely, and usually for new recruiters, it's the skill set gap that I see the most frequently. Usually, people are a subject matter expert in something, and they're like, "Oh, I can find people." Well, that's great, but how are you going to get clients? How are you gonna sell your services and your ability to find these people? And so they don't have that. So I think that's a good intro book to kind of set your mind correct.
Awesome. What's your favorite rec tech tools at the moment?
Whoo, man, I would say right now, advanced Boolean logic is a slam dunk for us. There's some other scraping tools out there that are good as well, but advanced Boolean logic, finding candidates that are not in the traditional swimming holes like LinkedIn and job boards and this sort of thing. That's really been the difference maker for us, not only in making placements, but earning the trust and appreciation of our clients, where we take maybe a contingent what was once a contingent opportunity to exclusive, or that sort of thing. It's really been a game changer for us.
Phenomenal. How do you think artificial intelligence is going to impact recruiting?
I see it as a tool. I know a lot of folks are threatened by it, and there's this, if you ask ChatGPT, what are the top 10 skill sets that are going to be replaced by AI? I think recruiting is on that list. But I think that ultimately, I see it as a tool. I'm excited for it, to be honest with you. It's obviously a huge piece already of the tool belt that we as recruiters currently use. I think it's something that in certain cases, in certain aspects of what we do, it will replace certain things. But ultimately, to deliver what we deliver, which is qualified candidates that are going to be able to hit the ground running day one within our clients' organizations and begin producing, contributing, whatever. AI is not going to be able to take that across the finish line. It's going to require someone with soft skills and industry know-how and tips and tricks and this sort of thing to be able to use those tools to make that happen. And so I think there's obviously definitely a place. I don't think I'm breaking news by saying that there's a place for AI in recruiting, but I don't see it replacing us at all.
I will kind of caveat it and say it will definitely replace the post and pray recruiters.
Yes, absolutely. Totally. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. If you don't have a real strategy, you're not really, you don't have something that you're executing to that is beyond just, well, I'm going to throw up a job ad on Indeed and get active candidates and this sort of thing. Those folks are toast. But the folks that actually have a legit value prop, that are truly delivering value and know how to navigate this space, they're going to be just fine.
Awesome. This is actually one of my favorite questions. If everything that you've gone through now, everything that you've learned, if you can go back, take all that information to the very beginning of your recruiting career and talk to yourself, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh man, definitely start with direct hire, not staffing. That would be one of the first ones. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that would definitely be one of the first ones. The other thing is, don't undervalue the importance of building relationships and rapport with people. I think that gets lost by a lot of recruiters, and really kind of creates this commodity phenomenon within our industry. The human element, really striving to ultimately earn the trust and respect of your client, so much so to the point where they invite you into their business almost as an extension of their HR department, is ultimately what we need to be shooting for. And so there's a lot of soft skills that are required there, and a lot of effort beyond just taking a client call or doing a discovery call or submitting candidates. There's so much more beyond that to be able to achieve that. And that's something that I missed early on, that I didn't totally get. So having that more at the forefront of what I was focused on would have been useful for sure.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, definitely thank you for coming on the podcast, sharing the ups and downs, the big ups and the huge downs, and
Yeah.
and most importantly, what you did to recover. Because I know a lot of people would be down and out and probably would have shut their doors, kind of
Yeah.
going through what you went through. And I think you talking about those lessons and you talking about what you did to get back on track, and because of that, become even more successful, I think is definitely super important for the listeners.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely.
Before I let you go, is there anything else that you would love to share with the listeners?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, so we have Millionaire Recruiter Club. I have two trainings that I would like to give to your listenership for free. And so I think that we're going to give you a link to post in the description of our episode here. But
It'll be in the show notes.
great, excellent show notes. So yeah, please, anybody listening who wants to get a little extra juice from me directly, I've got two free trainings for Ben's group here, and thanks. I'm super grateful for you having me on. I've enjoyed every second of it, and good to
Awesome.
do it.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for joining us, and for the listeners. Until next time.